So what was government dragging its feet about with the significant delay in releasing documents on the previous administration's handling of COVID? Was Dr Ranson's presentation toned down or just edited to focus on the core message? Was an hour, back in March 2020, long enough for Council of Ministers to set aside for consideration of such a weighty issue of how to deal with an unprecedented pandemic? I caught up with Isle of Man TV presenter Paul Moulton earlier this week and asked him about his FOI request, which led to all this new information being released.
Trust me, I have no joy in doing any of this. I'm at my wit's end with this, and hopefully this will be it now. I've done what I can do. You probably tell my voice that I'm quite despondent, really, but I've got to set some records straight, because the last programme sort of went off on a regulation thing, and I called it a hijack, but you understand what I mean. We didn't keep to the point we were trying to do, and I felt kind of it was going in a very odd direction. I mean, let's face it, the 4th of May was the FOIs I sent to DHA, Cabinet Office and the DHSC, the same one to 3 departments, because this was all relating to the Ranson Tribunal, and sitting in open tribunal when things were said and the words were toned down and all these sort of things were said. And let's face it, where did it all end up? It ended up with the government in a terrible situation, not only trying to stop the thing with more reviews and, going to the lawyers again, plus the fact that they then had to pay extra fines at the end of it because they were totally and utterly in the wrong. So everyone accepts that's happened. So I was just really trying to find out what was going on inside government when this was going on. Now, this is a simple process. We have the Freedom of Information Act, and you have 20 working days as such to produce something. And it didn't happen. Now,
but you do have a defence under the Freedom of Information Act that if it's complicated or there's a lot of work to do to produce the information, you can have a bit longer to do that, haven't you?
You would need an acknowledgement from that, wouldn't you? So DHSC did acknowledge, and really the one that only gave me information was Department for Home Affairs, and their response was confirming no information held, but disclosed for information purposes that certain documents requested were held. So that's a sort of strange one to say in the first. Anyway, and this was, let me get this right, including Dr Ranson's presentation dated the 13th of March 2020, being emailed to Dan Davis and forwarded by him to Will Greenhow. And DHA do not hold an email from the 16th of March 2020, which contains reference to versions. Now, see, that's it. That's the word versions. That was everything to us, because that's all we had to go on. As soon as you got a plural, that means more than one version was there. I mean, you understand that. But for them to put that in writing meant, just to finish that, it says DHA do hold an email from the 16th of March 2020, which contains reference to versions of the presentation supplied to Dan Davis. So they opened up the door, basically.
So maybe if we try and understand then what all these dates mean. There seems to have been a meeting of the doctors that took place on the 15th of March. This was the Sunday at which Dr Ranson was present, and Dr Ranson reflected the views of the doctors present and said there was a unanimous view that the borders needed to close. That was very clear, wasn't it? And then on the 16th of March, which was the Monday, Council of Ministers met, and whereas they didn't close the borders completely, they did introduce some restrictions.
Indeed. Well, I suppose the most important thing to mention here is that Dr Ranson on the Friday had this presentation. It was emailed to Dan Davis and whatever, and come Monday, that presentation didn't make it to Coleman as such, not in the form that she wrote it. I mean, this is the crux of the matter, only because, and I had to ask what medical qualifications these gatekeepers had. They didn't give me any answers. You have to think to yourself, why not just pass over the information directly in the form it was received in? Why not do that? I mean, and of course, is all I've been asking for.
The argument that came, or the position that came back was that this needed to be, toned down was the word that was used, wasn't it? But actually what they were saying, reading between the lines and certainly reading through all the email exchange that went on, I think what they were saying was actually there's too much detail in Dr Ranson's presentation. We've only got an hour. We not only have to convince the ministers with a presentation that something needs to be done, but then we have to discuss what is done. I mean, the burning question that I would have is, why did they only give it an hour to have this discussion? Surely, to goodness, something as important as this needed more than an hour's council meeting.
Why wouldn't you just give the information directly from the chief medical director, the one that's paid the big bucks to do that job? That's the obvious thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But the reason was because they only had an hour. Well, actually, they should have given it longer so that they could have provided all that information.
So when I put that in originally, they came back and said there was no communications after the Friday. No, it was the weekend. No communications existed. That's not true. You could say, therefore, they lied, because when we went back and we probed and they kept pushing it back and pushing back. When they finally did deliver it, bingo, what happened? These incredibly contrite sort of chit-chats between these gatekeepers to each other, and how they were treating the Council of Ministers as if they really weren't up to it almost. That's so, if you read it, it's not good reading for how the civil service should do their jobs, because one of those civil servants could have picked each other up for saying you shouldn't use that language.
And
there's none of it. It seemed like this is the banter that obviously goes on.
From a former Council of Ministers, from a minister who sat in Council of Ministers for 11 years, I read through this and I didn't feel quite so... I certainly wasn't surprised with what I read, certainly wasn't surprised that officers would have that level of chit-chat behind the scenes, and in certain cases, certain ministers would have been led by whatever the officers said, and in other cases, ministers would overrule the officers. But it wasn't a big surprise to me that a specialist's information would have been reduced in the amount, because council ministers have only a certain amount of time to consider all the information, and by including too much information, and let's be honest, I mean, having read through and looked at the toned down presentation compared with the other, the information that was in the final presentation that went to Council of Ministers did appear to include the most important elements, that there was a severe risk to life, and the quicker that you get this under control is the less likely you are going to have a major problem with facilities being overrun at the hospital.
Okay. So you're happy that civil servants run the country?
No, absolutely
because that's
not.
Where you go. Well, you're going down a dangerous route, because if you're accepting that these people are going to manipulate, change, or alter in any shape, form, or fashion material that you should be making, and I say you as in council ministers, you are meant to make the decisions, not them, right? So you've got to make your mind up. Who is running the country? Do you understand that looks bad, as it potentially that the almost like Cohen don't really matter. We get them over the line, in the grass. All these phrases they were using in there, and toned down. I'm sorry, the whole thing rested on toned down, because it was said at the tribunal. We heard about that. All I went there was to confirm those emails, and they hid that. This is a Freedom of Information Act. I can't stress how important this is to everyone on the Isle of Man. If there's no freedom of the press, what have we got? The whole reason for having FOIs is for not just press, but for anyone to get information that they're entitled to. Now, clearly, they said nothing existed, and then suddenly, miraculously, it does. And maybe, and you can join dots here, that the KC that's doing the whole review into it, she's gone, because it said, she put on her website, any FOIs should be answered, clearly referring to me. Any cease and desist letters won't put us off. This is all aimed at what I'm doing. But the fact is, she's probably got by then information, maybe more information than I've even got. So they knew the game was up. But I'm joining dots here, which I can't prove. But, because the fact is, they had that information from the word go, and they went out of their way not to release it. Now, what is that saying? I mean, I love the Isle of Man, but my goodness, this is testing my wits to make anyone think that we're living in a free and democratic society. And what's stopping these people who are still in position? This mindset, how can you change it? Because it is a mindset change.
Having been in Council of Ministers, I know that ministers regularly disagreed with the recommendations provided by officers. I know that officers... Well, imagine you are a minister and you've got 1,001 things that are distracting you on a daily basis. you expect, to a certain extent, you expect your officers to sift through the material and present to you the most relevant, most important bits of information. That if you had to go through all the detail on every single issue.
Are you saying closing the boards was not?
Well, no.
Well,
I'm saying nothing of the kind.
Well,
I'm just trying to give a bit of balance to this. So from, I mean, obviously this is a really big issue, but by the look of things, and certainly I would imagine with the benefit of hindsight, the officers will be thinking, actually, we probably, to have avoided all this, it wouldn't have been that big a deal to have included all of Dr. Ranson's original presentation.
I'm glad. With hindsight, if they just released it in the first place, this would have been a blip for a week.
Yeah.
It would have gone away. But it can't now go away, in my view, and a lot of people, and I'm stopped all the time. I think that they're misreading the room to some degree. I think Alpha's completely, by protecting his gatekeepers, threatening me with a legal letter, with the backing of the government. And he said in that letter to all the Timwell members that he's happy about that. But he asked me on your show, would I apologise if I got it wrong? But I haven't got it wrong. Toned down and all that was there. We found what we knew was... Look, I've got good intelligence. I wouldn't have gone on this fishing trip if I thought anything was... I was going to be in trouble. So when I got the Callum Wilde letter, it was almost like you couldn't believe your luck. I mean, as anybody just receiving that would have been absolutely... going, oh my goodness. And that was the intention of it. Clearly, in my view, I read that as a cease and desist. And what it did was it opened the door to some more serious questions. Why the DHSC are backing 3 civil servants on a litigation case when the DHSC isn't even mentioned in this letter that we might come on to that went to the Clerk of Timwell, which again, I was just pushing for information that I knew they had. I'm not that daft to think that I'm going off to jail or paying a fine, because I think I've been on the money all the way through this. So Chief Minister coming up on your Sunday show, and the stunt was he's going to tell us it's all going to come out next week. Well, hang on. That means does he know what's in there on Tuesday already? Because that's when it came out, I think, Monday, Tuesday. And likewise, where is he now? Why is he not starting by saying we've got to tighten up our civil service again? All these things you'd expect
and I suppose
to come out, and nothing has. I don't know.
Well, I suppose the Chief Minister will say that he said all this back at the time of the first Ranson inquiry findings. The Chief Secretary suddenly disappeared. Now, whether that was because he was pushed or whether he chose that this was the right time to leave.
For goodness sake. You know exactly what I know what happened. Just I can say it. I mean, he was handed the letter, because Alf told me. So, and it wasn't under any confidence thing. He put the letter on his desk. It was signed by 3, whatever. Yeah. He was out by 4. Yeah. And he's gone off away, presumably with a full pension. He's gone away fine. It's not reprimanded. No one has been reprimanded for anything.
So, okay, then, let's go into this then. Why should Will Greenhow be reprimanded in your view?
Let's put it this way. I don't know the ins and outs, but why would the Chief Minister tell him to go? Let's make it legal. Allegedly, let's shove allegedly in through this whole thing, because I don't know exactly the ins and outs of it, but he went, didn't he, that day? Yeah. When the whole thing, he'd gone by tea time. He cleared his desk. This is the most senior civil servant who's really hardly touching this whole thing. Really.
Well, again, I've read through this, and there's very little comment, to be honest.
Dr. Ranson's presentation, dated the 30th of March, being emailed to Dan Davis and forwarded by him to Will Greenhow. So he is in the mix.
Yeah. Oh, yes, he's in it,
but he's not.
Very little comment
indeed.
At all. Indeed. Which.
And he also didn't give evidence to the tribunal, because there was this thing about, is he going to talk as professionally or as an individual, whatever. I wasn't there that day, so I can't say much more. But all I know is for a fact he did not give any evidence. We're going down another road, which maybe later would be the fact this has to go to a public thing, because unless you got the use of the law to make people appear, then we're all. We're only going to hear from people who want to talk, aren't we? The thing is never going to be resolved 100%. Just like, an ex-pol were asked to do the thing. They were asked under certain terms and conditions. And, let's remember, I had to go fishing for the terms and conditions. They wouldn't release them. I mean, what are we doing in the Isle of Man? Why, when they shoved out those answers on the first FOI, which I still don't know who did the FOI, but my goodness, they couldn't get it out quick enough, could they? Because it was meant to make everyone feel calm. But when we asked for what the terms were, which is everything, resulted that. They should have released that themselves, let's face it. But they tried to stop it. Why would you try and stop it? All these questions just make me feel more anxious about how things are going on behind the scenes. It's a freedom of information.
Yes,
redact away,
and
but please let's give us the details.
That's the sad thing about all this, from what I can see, because again, as I say, I have read through this, and I didn't come across anything that I found to be particularly unusual or alarming. Now, I will stick to my view that it is not unreasonable for officers to try and present the information that is most relevant for the ministers in terms of the
we're
decision.
going around circles. I'll say the same thing again.
And you will say otherwise.
Yeah. No. But I would say if it's important enough, it surely has to go through. I mean, why change it?
But then,
why change it?
Using a completely different example, I wouldn't need to know all the details surrounding changes to the highway code. What I would want to know, this is when I was DOI Minister, what I'd want to know is what's the overarching reason for doing this, what are the implications of doing this, and what would happen if we just decided to stick with what we had in the first place. If an officer in those days when I was still a minister had supplied me with all the detail and expected me to read through the whole lot to find out for myself, I would probably be reprimanding the officer for providing too much. That said,
let's just remember,
I would have liked to have in the appendices all that information. Yeah. So I would want to see the summary of the case, and if there were any alarm bells that rang, I would then want to delve into the details.
Well, the reason you used earlier that this may be okay was that they've only got an hour, so let's get that one. But really, that's not your concern, is it? Really? Well, I mean, you put information in.
That's the big issue, isn't it? To me, why did they only set aside an hour for this discussion?
Well, there's so much more in there. Let's face it. We've got the actual minister, the health minister at the time, who actually was in there fighting for the border closure. It appears, doesn't it?
It's certainly minuted.
He seems to have seen the original. Now, this is where you're really going down a route like going, wow, if the minister of the DHSE thinks this is important, and if it had got to Tynwald, then, to Comyn, where would we be? I mean, again, this is not my problem. I am only asking for information. What they do was their concern, but it needs to be put into the public domain for everyone's sanity, including mine, because my goodness, this has been a fight. I mean, it's just been ridiculous. The way I've been treated. Where's Alf? And where's any apologies for him? No, he's happy to put money from the government to protect 3 civil servants who had the blessing of the DHS minister, who Mr. Hooper said he didn't know anything about it on the spat day we're having on Twitter. Yeah. He denied the minister.
You're listening to Isle of Man TV presenter Paul Moulton. We're considering the recent release of information relating to government's handling of the COVID pandemic. Let's just go back to the 3 officers concerned then. If you do follow my line, which is actually part of the senior officer's role, is to identify what are the big political issues and ensure that those are delivered in the most punchy way that Council of Ministers will reach or will be able to reach the correct conclusions, then actually, have any of the officers done anything wrong?
Well, again, that is not for me to make any judgment upon.
But you did, didn't you?
I had to use a quite strong words because it was getting to the point when nothing was coming anywhere. So, whatever happened, I don't think I crossed the line. I used legal journalistic terms where possible. But yeah, I had put some sort of pressure on because these are the names that come up. And these were names that nothing was showing on any freedom of information.
So if you had your time again, would you have used different words?
Well, that's not a question to be. What's the point? I've done what I've done, and boy, I am not happy that I've done it. In the sense of, do you think I really want to do this? I'm a semi-retired old person who just wants to sail into the sunset. But I knew from the first day of the Dr Ranson tribunal that I knew a great wrong had been done. I mean, you just listen to what's being said, and I couldn't not stand up. And I'm probably a lone voice out there standing up for what I believe is right. And clearly, wrongings have been done, and they've been shown with financial help to Dr Ranson. But it still doesn't take away what went on behind the scenes and why that information shouldn't be explained to the public. Because this is how the Isle of Man government may work in all sorts of other ways. It's corruption. And I'm not talking about giving money to things. It's corruption of power. They've over-possibly
Peter
stated
Karen,
powers.
Peter Karen, of course, famously described it as a corruption of the system.
Yeah.
So that's your opinion, obviously, Paul, but that doesn't necessarily reflect my opinion or indeed that of Manx Radio. Yeah.
But, this is something to me that I knew I had to deal with. I've done, we've all done things where you think, I've got to stand up. And this is one that I put myself in the firing line. And, I'm getting lawyers' letters and all that is just bonkers. Because why would they want to treat me in that way to shut? Well, I know. Well, the answer is they wanted me to stop. And even when I gave evidence, to the tribunal, into the actual thing, the KC, we had our thing. I can't discuss that directly because I said I wouldn't. But I had to get my legally person involved, who then said, "Well, they're trying to shut you down by the looks of it." I mean, it could be read in different ways, but potentially I wasn't going to continue because they wanted to go to the actual tribunal, and there was potential that I could wreck the whole thing if I continued. Well, I haven't. I don't think I've had it. Also, I'm still incredibly keen that all the information goes to that. Kate Brenner needs to hear from everybody. And I'm sorry, how can you get a conclusive look on this whole thing if you're just doing a report when people who want to talk to you will talk to you? That doesn't add up. I know it's a lot more money, but boy, in the terms of everything, it's the only way that we can do it. And there are cheaper ways of doing this, apparently. But if you're not under oath, well, I'm sorry. Or you don't turn up at all. The people I'm talking about, there's people there that have to account for their time somewhere.
Even with a public inquiry, the Isle of Man government has no power to insist that someone who doesn't live within the territory attends a public inquiry.
Well, if it's a police matter, they can. Of course they can. They can bring people back from anywhere. That's what I'm talking about. If you have to go all the way to a police investigation, and that brings us into Abbots Wood territory, which I'm not ready to do yet. This is probably my next point. If I have to go anywhere, it's Abbots Wood in the second lockdown, leading up to the second lockdown. What went on there? Because again, there's some very foggy stuff that came up in that tribunal. Not foggy, interesting or alarming, and people haven't really reacted to that one either. But anyway, that's. But we're talking about people dying, Phil. People died, and I'm so sorry, but this is not right.
Yeah. Let's go back then to some of the evidence that wasn't presented. You've read through, you've looked at the various presentations. There was a presentation that Dr Ranson had given, I think it was to the doctors, was it?
I haven't gone through all the details, but
right, okay.
Because that's way above my pay scale.
But Dr Ranson's presentation that was shared with Dan Davis, who then shared it further.
Her presentation on the Friday the 13th?
Yeah. What was missing from that in terms of what then ultimately went to Council of Ministers that you think should have been in there?
Well, I mean, it was not. I think I've already answered this one. I'm not here to tell people how to do their jobs. All I would suggest is whatever Dr Ranson provided should have gone direcally to the council ministers. I can't add any more. I'm not involved in the how you do it or whatever. This is not my thing.
I suppose this is the crux of the matter, because ultimately, as a former decision maker, I read through both the presentations and I thought, well, the information that was presented to Council of Ministers touched on all the key aspects and would have led me to believe that the sooner we introduced the restrictions that would be recommended, the better. That was clear from the presentation that went to Council of Ministers. It was also clear, I don't think it was any clearer in Dr Ranson's original presentation, so I'm not sure that the issue is such.
Once you've got versions made, we don't. Why are versions being made? That's the question. Why is someone taking something from a doctor who's done her work, and she presumes that's going to be delivered to Komen, and yet it doesn't quite turn out that way? It doesn't matter what's happened. Honestly, it's just a protocol of you have the information, you provide it to them. It's nothing to do with you, basically. It shouldn't. And this 1 hour thing is just mythical, because we've still got issues there with the minutes don't quite add up. They had a morning meeting, they had an afternoon meeting, and I think Chris Thomas was there in the morning, wasn't he? Then he wasn't a minister in the afternoon, but it doesn't quite add up again. And metadata is everything. I mean, since the Exwell thing, I'm not kind of an expert, but I've got people who are experts, and we're getting all this information, and it's still not adding up, some of it, on where or why copies are being made, that are being produced. If you're doing an FOI, surely you go to the server, you pull the thing off, and you send it on to that person. What's the reason for bringing it off that server putting it into another program, which then shows that metadata has been altered, and then some of it's all been wiped, Phil. All the metadata. Now, that doesn't make sense either, because there should be the original metadata, because that's honest, open and transparency, isn't it? Because you're showing this is it. It dates back to 2020. There's nothing to worry about. But no, some of it doesn't quite read like that. And that's another day's story.
This is I mean, again, if Council of Ministers or the government wanted to create a reason for a conspiracy theory, then they've done it on several occasions here. I mean, you say that they lied, but I mean, it's a term, isn't it? They said they didn't have the information. Presumably, they said they didn't have the information you asked for. But then, when you asked more specifically,
no.
Delivered.
I don't think so. I mean, it was. Trust me, if you look at the actual FOI, it's so detailed. This is, some people working and help me, because I, as a layman, would just have gone, "Can you give me the information?" And there's always ways to wriggle out of that. But this was very, very definitive. And I said it to a piece of cameras. I had to. I mean, this is when we're down to me talking to myself, because there's nobody else to talk to, about how on earth on Friday, everything's, WHO had just announced a pandemic and everything is going crazy. This is right at the beginning of the whole thing. So they're not worn out or anything like that. This is the excuse that was in the X-Poll thing, that they were all worn out. I don't believe that. Anyway, so Friday, there's some chitter, and then there's the Monday, the thing. But the weekend, it was all blank until we went back again. And that's when it came out. That's not correct, because they have to release everything. That's just like you go to the court and you have to get your bundles, for you and against you, doesn't matter. And that's another issue, as you know.
And if you don't get all that information, then
there's a problem. That's an AG thing here. I mean, look at what's going on. I mean, who's running the country? And it's that serious. And I really apologise to people listening to this going, please get him off. And I honestly, because I know I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I keep saying that because honestly, I'm so Marmite. I don't want to be here talking to you about this, but I really appreciate you, Phil, because you're the only person interested in the journalistic phrase. And we need to check your credentials for being a journalist as well.
Well, yes. I've never claimed to be a journalist.
I've never claimed to be one. I've done the job, but then that's another thing.
Let's try another tack on this. Try then to put yourself in the mind of the Council of Ministers, or a minister at that time. You have received information from the medical experts, and you have heard from the Minister for Health, who has very clearly stated that more stringent measures need to be introduced. So you've got all that information, but you also have all the other information, which is all the businesses that are going to go bust, the economic impact. And you've only had effectively a week, maybe not even a week, to fully consider all these implications. Could you understand perhaps why ministers might say, OK, we'll introduce some regulations and then we'll come back to this next week and try and do some more?
They didn't get the report. We've done this. They didn't see what Dr Ranson said in full. So I'm not there to act or even second guess what could go on. All I've been interested in is what did or did not get to Komen because of gatekeepers' intervention, or do I need allegedly? I'll bung it in there. I don't know these days. As far as I know, we're done with this. I think everything's. Even Callum Wilde have written to me literally as I got the letters coming up saying that they don't want to. They're not associated with them anymore, or the DHSC. I think it was a sort of whoops. Let's just call it a day on that one. But it's been said. I think we've got to understand how government of the Isle of Man has been working, why they didn't release stuff, and what goes on elsewhere, because you don't know yourself when you're time in government what would be going on. Let me ask you, did you think you were running the government, or do you think the civil servants were doing it for you even then, in your day?
I knew that if I, as a minister, took a decision that the civil servants disagreed with, that I would be likely to meet some hurdles along the way in ensuring that my view prevailed. I absolutely knew that, but I also respected the views of or the work done by senior civil servants to help me as a minister to understand what the issues of the day were. What I really detested was getting long, wordy papers which weren't particularly well written, and I have to say that the chief exec of the DHSC, as she was, Mrs. Magson, there were the emails and the writing that she had led me to think, as a decision maker, I would be having to think and double think what exactly she was saying in these messages. But yeah, I found it really useful to have civil servants helping distill out the information that I needed to make a decision.
But you know it's in their code, and I've referred to that. There was a code of practice that they have to pass stuff on.
Mm.
So if that hasn't happened, and this is not for me to be involved in, you think there might be the potential that something hasn't been adhered to. Because by their own regulations, they're meant to pass things. You agree that?
Yeah,
right?
but
it's written down in.
But what they have to pass on are the key and core.
It's very
elements
definitive. You can't alter things. You should pass it on. I mean, I'm sorry. From what I read, I can read it out to you if you want, but it's clearly says that civil servants aren't actually involved in the decision-making process.
Yeah,
because that's not their job.
They aren't.
To supply it.
But they are expected to sift through a whole load of information and then decide what's the most relevant and what's the bits that the ministers really need to be able to make their decisions.
Would you be comfortable with what happened if you were there? Would you have been comfortable? Now you know the whole facts. And let's face it, most people in Coleman probably never knew that this had even gone on. The first they may know about it was when the FOI came out, probably. I don't know. But you wouldn't have felt comfortable, surely. Tell me you wouldn't have enjoyed the idea that you didn't know what was going on completely?
I absolutely.
Or information?
Absolutely. But then in such a situation as is being reported, and it is alluded to in some of the preamble that was it Cabinet Office or one of the departments had a kind of we're going to provide you with a guide to what actually happened, even though you haven't specifically asked for it. One of the documents gave this additional narrative to allow us to understand. Having read that additional narrative, if it is correct, and I have no reason to believe it isn't, and again having read Dr Ranson's original presentation, having read the presentation that went to Council of Ministers, I would feel that I was presented in this specific instance with the most important bits of information that I needed to make the decision. I would also have known, though, as a decision maker at that time, that there was so much going on, and we only have to look at what was happening in the UK at the time. There was lots of conflicting advice. Advice was changing almost on an hourly, certainly daily basis. So I can sort of understand why Council of Ministers might have been concerned that they were being bounced into doing something that a week later they might have then thought, actually... This
is all hypotheticals. We don't know what.
Absolutely.
We don't know
but
what.
But you asked me that question.
I know, but Mr Ashford was the one that seemed to see it. And going back to that, it's interesting that he's the one that actually read the information and came to a conclusion that works. We need to do something ASAP.
Whether there is something to read into the fact that Chris Thomas was there in the morning and then chose not to come in the afternoon.
I'm keeping my powder dry on that one because it's clearly something in there. I don't know if he's going public on what exactly happens, but he's certainly.
Certainly the one thing that can be said about Chris Thomas since he left the Council of Ministers on the more recent occasion is that he's not been shy of making clear his views on a range of different issues.
He's been on the radio almost every day, it seems like, doesn't he? But it's again, we've got to have surely open, honest, and transparency. I mean, Alf stood for that. Let's be. Why would he want to use government money to push more pressure on me? I mean, this is what
that doesn't
add up to me, does it?
These are the bits that are the most surprising. I could sort of, having read all the information that came through your Freedom of Information request, I can see, there are things that should have been done better. Dan Davis will go to his grave regretting using the word toned down in his email, but. On the whole, I don't see an awful lot of smelly fish in that. But the actions subsequently not to provide this information apparently anyway, to have it dragged out of them kicking and screaming, that seems strange to say the least. Why particularly bearing in mind this is a previous administration. And two of the key players involved in this particular issue no longer work for government. What's government going to? What have they got to lose from providing clarity on what happened? And this was one of the most traumatic periods for the Isle of Man, possibly over the last 100 years. This is a big issue.
Not you notice it in the other media behind you, but I mean, no, back to that's a question that the Chief Minister on your show that Sunday, that live programme, said he was quite willing to keep, putting funds at the 3 gatekeepers' disposal, government funds, to keep on the pressure on me. I mean, when do I get a break in this? I'm the one that's trying to find out information, which I'm allowed to have, and they're putting as much pressure on me to stop it. This is the whole problem we're dealing with. This is not open, honest, and transparent. Why is Alf going on their side? These are 3 civil servants who may or may not have done something wrong. That's for other people to decide. As I said to you, potentially it could be something that should be looked at. But Alf Cannon has taken it very carefully that he's on their side, not open to negotiations or taking any of what I've said. I mean, he was quite hostile, really, wasn't he, on the Sunday programme? He's a friend of mine, and we laughed about it in a sense afterwards, because that's what you do, don't you? You go into court, you argue your piece, and you leave. But I'm disappointed, not only for what I've shown out here, because who wants to wash all this linen in public? This is not helping Isle of Man PLC. This is not doing any good for anybody. But someone has to take account for it. Someone needs to hold their hand up. How long have I been saying that? Hold your hand up. We got it wrong. Whoops, move on. But no, let's have a second appeal. With the Ranson thing, when you go, you're kidding. You can't make this up. And they all sat there going, we don't know why we're here. This is not right. And that, when you, like your fish thing, analogy, something just doesn't add up. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. That's all we've been doing.
And as I say, the evidence that you've extracted on this particular freedom of information request doesn't smell fishy, but
the whole process
of getting it, you kind
that's
of,
the problem.
Well, what are you trying to hide then? And it is strange. So let's get this straight. The things that you are looking for.
I'm done.
You have been looking for information so that the public can better understand what's happening. You are not suggesting that officers have or have not acted incorrectly or illegally. You are just trying to get the information out so that people can understand. Is that
indeed? This is recorded on a Tuesday, so things may change by Sunday. I want to thank you on the record again for what you've done. I haven't been able to do my job anymore because I'm now the news, and it makes me upset because this is not how it's meant to be. I dealt with him.
Yeah.
So I was just getting a bit emotional there because I didn't realise it's going to affect me so much, this whole thing. But no, okay, so yeah. You've been amazing. I mean, I don't know if you've been on any pressure not to put stuff out, but if it wasn't for you,
and I should say I have had no pressure to not produce these programs. Obviously, I have been advised where we stand because as a regulated broadcaster, we have to follow certain rules and regulations, and I've been reminded of those. Not unsurprisingly, if you've received a lawyer's letter, Manx Radio want to make sure that we don't cross any lines that could result in us getting lawyers' letters.
Unless they will remember that when Abbotswood was in full flight as a story, we were all told it was completely sub judice, blah, blah, blah. We were being controlled looking at that. And this it's been hung over this story for absolutely ever, that we mustn't cross any lines. So it was quite remarkable. Then I do get a lawyer's letter when there's nothing left to really say. And I say just now, got this letter saying that Callum Wilder off the case sort of thing, but still claiming I've defamed. If anyone's defamed anyone, let's put this one in. Mr. Hooper, I'm a man with a camera and all that stuff, but really laying in quite derogatory terms on Twitter. I mean, as a minister, and then there's me asking him, did he know of that letter from Callum Wilder? Oh, nothing to do with me. So what's that say? That means that he left it to his officers. This is dangerous territory, surely, for a legal letter. But all that. So I can't say too much more about it because I may have now got issues with Mr. Hooper for defamatory remarks that he's made. And then the Chief Minister, and what he put in that letter to all members of Tynwald, is defaming me. And it's bonkers.
And again, let's explore this. If Laurie Hooper has said that you are a man with a camera that publishes things on the internet, that's not incorrect, but it misses out some fairly important information.
Come on, he won't talk to me now because he thinks I'm biased. You can't make this stuff up because all I'm doing is asking the questions. I mean, really, that interview that I did with the guy from that committee, and I couldn't be more clear. I said we've got to hear what's going on because there was allegations of bullying.
And this is the Health Services Consultative Committee.
Correct. And the ex-chair who came to me. You have to remember, I'm this sort of last stop for a lot of people who think I'm going to be able to sort things out. Well, A, I can't. B, all I can do is listen to what you've got to say and then measure it up, and hopefully that was such an explosive interview. If anyone hasn't seen it yet, it's on Ireland TV on YouTube.
And I should say Andrew Cole has asked to come on one of my programmes in the future.
I mean, I put a tweet out the other day because it's 29 days at that stage since he said he would do a full rebuttal, but albeit you said it was going to be the two of them together. I'm fascinated to see where that is going. Well, we've got a minister now who won't talk to a media man. This is a man from Liberal Vannon, for goodness sake. This is meant to be open and honest and all the same things put out there, but suddenly it's not. I am now suddenly the enemy because I asked the questions. That's just not right, is it?
Is that the reason?
I'm biased.
Yeah.
That's what he said. You know what? He's made my job impossible now. I can't do the yearly interviews with people because everything now revolves around this sort of attitude. I did get asked to a press conference to Julie Edge the other day, and that was great because I wasn't sure if I'm now deemed not a journalist. Mr. Hooper's written to the committee at Tynwald saying that I shouldn't be covering it. Well, I'm not going to, because I go down there once on a Tuesday every month when I can, if I'm here, and I sit there for 3 hours for question time. And it takes me, because I use 2 cameras and it takes me a couple of hours to put together. And why am I doing it? I'm not getting paid. I haven't been paid as a journalist, whatever you want to call it, my stuff, for years since MTTV finished.
But you get sponsorship for you run adverts on the YouTube. That's
channel, Google get that. So that makes something, a couple of quid a month. It's not a living wage. And honestly, it's hit and miss. You don't know what you're going to get. But my point is, if I do something on like covering Tynwald, I'm doing that because I think it's important. Because at the minute there's no cameras in there, and it's a public service. And then he writes, he's not there all day. Oh, he doesn't cover the whole thing. What's he thinking about? This is me doing it on my own fruition. And he's messed that up now, so I'm not going to do it anymore.
This is sort of me blowing my own trumpet because I do cover it for Meg's Radio.
You're paid to do it.
I'm the only person who does turn up for the whole day.
Well, especially when you think some of those questions, you go, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my. So maybe, 100 people might watch it. That's what, if you monetarisation, I think that's 10p or something. It's something, or 1p. I can't remember. It's really quite low. So you need to be into the thousands or millions to really. And Manx politics will never do it. So I'm just news for you. I'm probably sort of retiring to some degree. I've always said that about doing this stuff. I'm selling my house because I need the cash. I'm literally out. Don't get me wrong. No violins needed. I'm on holidays. I've got lots of holidays booked. Yeah. But I have to have an income of some description. And I think Mr. Hooper's just made it clear. The Liberal Vannon head, that he doesn't actually agree with talking to me. He can hold his own. All he has to do is answer the questions. He can talk to you because presumably he thinks you're not going to get a hard time. I don't know. I'm only guessing.
Well, I don't know. What I can tell you is that regardless of whether I have journalistic qualifications or not, I do have to present balanced programmes. That's a requirement of the broadcasting legislation.
Sure. And I'm the Wild West. But, as he referred to it as, these sort of unregulated. Well, this goes back to the Sunday Show, unregulated. I mean, goodness me, what on earth? That has got nothing really to do with it. In my case, I'm not sitting there spouting. I mean, admittedly, when I do a chit-chat with Chris Robert Shaw, I know it's become now like a more of a GB Newsy thing, when you have an opinion, and you are allowed opinions, because that's not an interview, that's a chit-chat. And even other people, you kind of frustrate yourself sometimes because you want to give an opinion. But I will talk to anybody, and if he wants to do an interview, Mr. Hooper wants to kiss and make up, I'm really happy to talk to him, because I will still only ask him the same questions that you probably will ask him about those allegations of the bullying manner that was handled in that particular meeting. This is very important stuff. If it ends up as a sort of spat in the courts, so be it. I mean, the one thing I've got is so much support out there. I think that it's just crazy. I've got to thank everybody who supported me. Stopped in Ramsey yesterday a few times. I was up there. And, this is where they're reading the room wrong. And of all people, Laurie Hooper, who is meant to be, I'm sorry, but it's so important that he was for transparency. is trying to shut me down for asking him a question.
So it's quite clear to me, having been on both sides of the political divide, both as a politician and now as someone trying to help the public understand what's going on politically. It's quite clear to me that we need a very active press, media, to scrutinise the work of government and of Tynwald, the Parliament. What do you think the situation is now compared with perhaps what it was 10, 15 years ago? Are we reasonably solid and strong in terms of media coverage, or are you concerned for the future?
Well, a leading question, but I mean, we have a cut and paste journalist thing, don't we? I mean, when almost all the evidence was put over, whatever, and even Manx Radio ran that as the headline, any journalist, in my view, would go, well, that means that not all of it was actually put out. So you would rewrite the story, not cut and paste. And there's so much of that going on because obviously newsrooms are under a lot of pressure. I mean, the papers is very small, and they probably this sort of thing is a very paper story. Manx Radio got after that Freedom of Information came out was 10 full time, and you were part of the 5 extras. And there was a great program done about Sommerland, so you have the wherewithal to do them. But the question is, only you have talked to me up here at Manx Radio, and anything that's gone out has come from your clips. And I don't know if I've even made a clip, but no one's even talked to me. You know, when that Freedom of Information came out and my name was in the actual thing, I would have expected they may have wanted to get a quote from me, just out of courtesy, but no one rang me. So that worries me a lot because this isn't going... But
And this matters,
yeah,
of course, because if politicians think that they aren't answerable to the public other than once every 5 years, then extraordinary things can
I don't
happen.
think government can believe their luck how easy it is to get a story out there and it's not really challenged. I mean, the big story, if you listen to Manx Radio at the minute, would be about the heritage railways. I mean, that's getting tons of coverage. But question, could I not be on the Manor Line to do some stuff? I'm sure my name comes up every now and again, I hear. The morning show, which was, the mandate program, and there's, I could be a guest on that. People could talk to me if they wanted to, but I've never been asked. Now, that's kind of odd, but...
And Alabama newspapers?
They did. Adrian wrote the thing up the other day, and I did see him. I said, you didn't come to me for a quote, and he didn't think he needed to. He agreed with you that he thought most of it was out there. So again, I'm kind of quite interested when I hear that, because obviously I'm so close to it. It's kind of... I assume people can see it just what I'm doing. But, I take balance into this whole thing. I've got to keep myself off being the news. This is the last time I'm doing this, as far as I'm aware, because who else wants to hear about it? But the danger is we are moving towards, like I was going to say Russia, but it's probably maybe more like North Korea if you're not careful, that the government departments can just put out a press statement and it's just accepted without anybody thinking about, challenging it or even better, making news. If you look on a website on any of the outputs, how much of it is just government or police or whatever just come through an email? How much is actually generated as a news story? And then maybe here would be the place to lead on that. But at the same time, there's always the usual things, government money coming in and we can't be too, you know how it all works out.
And I should say, I certainly have never been affected by the fact that government may or may not choose to continue to fund aspects of Manx
I think we all know what
work.
we're saying. I'm not saying this is going on, but you have to think that this is the biggest newsroom.
I think possibly a bigger concern, and this is something I think we've discussed before, is it being incredibly difficult to get certain politicians, ministers included, to actually come and talk to you about anything.
But even the once a year thing, I think I was the only one doing it. I had 2 10-minute interviews with each of the MHKs, one looking back on the year, one looking forward. And last year it wasn't a full house by quite a long way. And this year I'm not even bothered. I said I'm not going to bother because I think it's all going to be just... I'm tainted now. I am too much in the news rather than reporting the news. It's unfortunate, but I wouldn't have not done it, honestly. But I can see how people fold. I can see how people are under tremendous pressure. And... I have to finish this by saying, where is people supporting me from the government end? I mean, there are a couple in there, but there's a lot of nothingness being heard. They're not all jumping up and down after the FOIs came out. And I think there's going to be obviously Claire Christian is definitely onto this, and Tim and a few others. But overall, shouldn't there be much more interest in this from everybody? Because if we don't have a free press in the Isle of Man, what do we have? Nothing.
That was Isle of Man TV presenter Paul Moulton. There's certainly lots to think about following this week's show. Paul has made several statements which government may wish to respond to, and I have invited government to respond should they wish. The same opportunity has been offered to Minister Hooper for similar reasons. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. I'm Phil Gorn. God on Mayos and Geistach Rum. Thanks for listening.